Good morning, everybody. It is good to be here. I had a heads up about that on previous series that you guys have done that I was doing the video talks, that every time I've come up on the screen, that youth life group has shouted out that. So great that you guys are here this morning. And this church is starting the Fueled series that we put together. We ran this last year in our church, and it's just been wonderful to see other churches be able to make use of it. Great, no worries at all. All getting sorted at the back there. And so I presume everybody's got a workbook. When you came in, I saw they were handing them out at the entrance. Is anybody who doesn't have one of these workbooks? Okay, the handouters did a great job. Well done, guys. Just like to orientate you through this book if you are new to this idea of a church-wide campaign. If you open your workbook to page 4 this morning, you see we've Fueled Series Week 1, Sunday Notes. So there's a blank page there. So I'm going to be sharing some stuff this morning. Heads up, I've got 3 points in my message. And you might like to just jot down the notes on that blank page, page 4. This week in the midweek life groups, on page 5, you're going to be watching a short video. It's about, I guess, 17 or 18 minutes long. And there's some fill-in words in that video. The title of the video is The 4 Internal Tanks. And so while you're sitting watching this week in life groups, you'll be filling out the fill-in words on page 5. That sequence is repeated through the first few pages of the book. The Sunday blank page for notes, and then the midweek video. Then on page 16, you'll notice that there are some devotional readings, and there are 6 per week. There's a day left for catch-up in case you skip a day. But our encouragement, so this on page 17 is the first reading. You see it's week 1, day 1, labeled at the top of page 17. So you might like to start that tomorrow morning. And when I went through this book for myself, I did it with a pen and a ruler, and I underlined the things that meant a lot to me. On the top right-hand block, you'll see that there are 4 empty tanks. That's on each page of the devotional writings, and I'll explain a bit about those tanks this morning. And hopefully as you go through, you'll each morning just do a little check-in with yourself. How are my levels in my spiritual, physical, mental, and emotional tanks doing? And after 6 weeks, hopefully we're building a new habit of how to learn to read our internal tanks and glorify God by managing them better. So that's 6 readings per week. And so this workbook is kind of the guide. Sunday, midweek, and the personal readings are all in here. Just by the way, I jumped right into the workbook. It is so good to be here in Plet. We've had such a warm welcome. And these series, we started putting together similar type series about 7 or 8 years ago. And there are about 45 churches, a lot in South Africa, but some in other countries in the world. We've started to translate some of these series into other languages, German, Spanish, French, the 3 at the moment. And just wonderful to see different churches use a similar resource, but with the aim of growing in our faith journey together. So if you're new here, this is also my first time at this church. Huge welcome to you as well. And thank you so much, Charles and Di and the team, for your warm hospitality. When I was about 3 years old, my parents bought a new car. And by the time I left school, it was no longer new. There were quite a few things broken on that car. So they very kindly allowed me to use it as I was living at home, but I was studying, and that was my student transport. And it had a few problems. The first one was that the fuel gauge didn't work at all. It had broken some time ago. And so the warning light, when the fuel tank got low, that light didn't work either. Now, that was okay for a while because I could measure how many kilometers per tank I could get and kind of count and check when the little odometer reached a certain number, I had to put in more fuel. But then on a day, the odometer stopped working as well. Nothing on the dashboard worked anymore. And the third problem was that I was a student, so it wasn't that I could easily live with the tank just filled up every second or third day. I was kind of just praying and hoping a lot of the time. And my prayers and hope worked mostly, but one night, maybe 5 p.m., I had an evening test at the university. And so on my way there, just about a kilometer away from my house, the inevitable happened and the car ran out of fuel completely. That was the bad news. The good news was that I was at the top of a long, about a 3-kilometer, very gently sloping road that ran down to the university. The bad news was that there were, I think, 3 traffic lights on the 3 kilometers between me and there. And so, with a lot of adrenaline, I thought if I can just measure my progress, just kind of feathering on the brakes, maybe I can catch the green or maybe on a dark orange and just keep going. And amazingly, I managed to do all of that. The good news was that I made it there. The bad news was that the university was uphill. But the good news was one of my friends lived in a student digs on a driveway that was downhill. So I just swerved into their driveway, parked my car, and then sprinted up and got there just as the test started. I wouldn't recommend it, by the way, as a way to start a test. But the metaphor is that our internal wiring is the metaphor we're using in this series is that we've got these internal tanks, if you like, these 4 energy tanks, but we've also got warning lights that shine upon the dashboard of our lives. When our physical tank gets a bit empty in the evenings, we yawn. Sometimes we crave a bit of sugar and we want to sleep. Those are warning lights, or those are signal lights on the dashboard of our life. And I shared yesterday during, I had an extended time to share some of my story that for me, I failed for many years of my life to properly read the lights on these internal tanks, my physical, mental, emotional, and physical tanks, and I ended up in a very, very dark place. I had a major physical health breakdown, and I'll share my story just in a few minutes in the midweek video that you'll be watching this coming week. But the guiding verse, the key verse for this whole series is from Luke chapter 10 and verse 27, and it says this. It says, Jesus answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. Now this is, if you're familiar with the Bible, this is one of the kind of big deal verses in the New Testament. We know that because Jesus has been asked a question, what's the greatest commandment of all? And he answers by saying this, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. Now, when I read that verse, I have a question come to mind. When Jesus says heart, if you could put the underlines on as well, please, those 4 words, heart, soul, strength, and mind, why didn't Jesus just say, love God with everything you've got? I mean, that would have covered all the bases, wouldn't it? What's the greatest commandment? Love God with everything you've got. But instead, Jesus delineates heart, soul, mind, and strength. And as I was reflecting on these things, I thought that those words aligned with the journey that I was on in a huge way, and that roughly the heart, soul, mind, and strength relate to our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual energy. We all have got physical energy. We've got emotions, how we feel, thoughts, how we think, and then the spiritual aspect of our lives, it's kind of our reason for existence. We were designed to have this amazing connection with God. But just like a physical fuel tank, those tanks can be emptied and filled by a variety of different things. And so this verse has become a huge guiding light for me because I think what Jesus is saying is that we love God best when we look out for the health of our spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical being. He's designed us to love Him with everything we've got, our thoughts, our feelings, our physical energy, and of course, our spiritual connection together with Him. I'm so grateful to God that I was raised in a Christian home. My family were very involved in a local church my whole life. And if I reflect on my journey, in my growing up, there was a huge emphasis on the spiritual aspect of our lives. But there wasn't that much mentioned about the mental and emotional aspects, and occasionally the physical was thrown in. In fact, certainly in the kind of teachings that I heard as a child, I would say they lean very much on this side of the continuum, where anything that involved too much emphasis on mental or emotional health was viewed with quite a lot of suspicion. I heard preachers actually saying stuff like this: guys, we don't need all of this modern psychology nonsense. All you need to do is obey God, follow Him with all your heart, and things are going to be good. And I'm hugely grateful to God for the psychologists in our local church, medical doctors, therapists, professional counselors that have helped me on my journey. And for me, it's not an either or. It's as different areas of science understand God's truth, it can be extraordinarily helpful. Now, I'm sure the people that I heard teaching, their hearts were good, but my takeaway was ignore my emotions, develop strong willpower, and the rest would follow. And for 6 years, I suffered chronic symptoms from an incurable autoimmune disease, largely, I think, to suppressing a whole lot of my emotions, not processing thoughts and feelings very well. Now, if that's on this end of the continuum, maybe there's some people here that your journey has been on the other end of the continuum. This is kind of about suppression. Just ignore really what you're thinking and feeling. On this side is an equal and opposite emphasis, which is kind of just live your best authentic life, and if you feel it, do it. If you feel it, it must be right. And so I don't think that that's helpful either. And somewhere in the middle, I think, is where we're called to live. And we have the teaching of Jesus that we've read above, is that we need to love God with heart, soul, mind, and strength. Now, in the Bible, we don't only have the teachings of Jesus, but we also have the example of Jesus' life. And my journey through the stuff which is now the field content was to start to read the Gospels a little bit differently. And what I noticed is that Jesus set an amazing example of somebody who felt and expressed very real emotion. For example, the Bible records these things. In John 11:35, it tells us that Jesus wept. The astonishing thing about that sentence, Jesus wept, is that just a few minutes later, maybe within 2 hours, the guy that had died, that everyone was weeping over, Jesus raised him from the dead. And Jesus knew he was going to do that, and yet he still expressed the real emotion of grief. He empathized with the grief that was at this graveside. It says in Matthew 26, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Now, if you come from where I started out, where you suppress all, no, Jesus, all you need to do, just have strong willpower, ignore those feelings. But the Bible records in the Garden of Gethsemane, he was sorrowful and troubled. Those were real emotions that he was experiencing. In Luke 10, it tells us that he was full of joy. How did they know that? The gospel writers. It must have been expressed. It was visible. Jesus is full of joy. It showed on the outside. It's interesting in Matthew 14, verse 13, when Jesus heard what had happened to John, who had been beheaded, and that was kind of a real close ministry colleague, it says he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. I believe that was Jesus, just withdrawing to process emotions of loss and grief. Jesus sets us an example of how to live wholehearted, healthy emotions. With regards to his mind, the way that Jesus taught the people and reasoned with the religious leaders showed us that he used his mental faculties well. He could have just said, hey, all you guys wanting to study different things, forget about all of that here. Here's another miracle. Argue with that. But he didn't only do miracles, he also taught and reasoned. In other words, using our minds well glorifies God, and Jesus sets us an example of that. Later on in Romans 12, it tells us to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. It's a vital part of being a follower of Christ, looking after how we feel and how we think. Not only that, but in the physical aspects of Jesus' life, we read these different verses. It tells us that he was hungry, he got thirsty, he was tired, and in Matthew chapter 8 it tells us he slept. That's a pretty powerful verse to me, because so often when I felt I've got too much work to do, I've chosen not to sleep and work a little bit harder. And Jesus, that was in the middle of a great storm, is peacefully sleeping and later wakes up and calms the storm. My takeaway from this is that Jesus not only taught us to love God with everything we've got, but he demonstrated it. He paid attention and demonstrated healthy emotional, mental, and physical living. The reason I'm challenged by all of this is because so often I have not stewarded my emotional, mental, and physical energy as well as I should have. My physical health, I've often overworked, often got too little sleep, often made unwise eating decisions. In my emotional world, I've often not processed negative emotion and loss and grief well. And in the mental aspect of my life, I've often allowed the wrong kinds of thoughts to dwell in my mind. And so when I hear the teachings of Jesus, but more importantly, see his example, I'm challenged to live differently. And what I'd like to say up front in this series is that what's really important is we're not talking about retreating into this selfish, self-protecting little bubble. Like, guys, I can't do anything for the next 3 years. I'm just busy processing stuff. Processing's good, but you see, Jesus' end goal wasn't withdrawing into a little bubble. It was actually to live out a God-given purpose in the world. And so the healthier these 4 aspects of my life are, the greater my connection with the purposes of God can be in the world. Not an overworked, exhausted, burnt out person, but hopefully life to the full. So today I would like to look at 3 things. Firstly, a promise from Jesus. Secondly, an invitation from him. And thirdly, a response that we need to make. Those are my 3 points. So let's dive in. Number 1, a promise from Jesus. And this is the promise, life to the full. If you take your notes, you might like to write that down. Number 1, promise from Jesus, life to the full. And I take that point from John chapter 10 and verse 10. And Jesus says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. What an incredible verse. Where so often I've lived empty and exhausted, there's a promise from Jesus, you can have life to the full and live with these tanks in the top third, if you like, to use our metaphor. Now, these 4 internal tanks, I'd like to just explain a little bit, and through the next 6 weeks, you're going to be looking at each tank individually. But the model I drew up, and this was for myself in this chronic health journey that I had, trying to figure out how all my internal systems were meant to be operating, is I visualized that inside of us, we've got these 4 tanks, spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical. And these are going to come up over and over again. The whole series is based around these 4 tanks. And what I did is when this idea first landed in my head, every morning, probably for about 18 months, I thought about each of those 4 tanks, just a little 5-minute reflective moment, and I thought back on the previous 24 hours. So I'd wake up Monday morning, be spending some time with God, but I set aside 5 minutes to do what I've encouraged you to do, is just to do a little measurement, to check in across the 4 tanks. And I try to put a measurement according to where my levels were at on those tanks. And the way that I visualize it is that the top third of those tanks is the healthy zone. The middle third of each tank is what we could call the danger zone. And then the lowest third of each of those tanks is the burnout zone. When I'm in the healthy zone, and across those 4 tanks, I'm sitting in that top third, my responses are generally better all around, but especially to tough situations. I'm generally more gracious and kind when I'm living in the top third. My mind feels sharper, able to make decisions and think things through, and spiritually, I feel connected to God in a deeper way when I'm living in the top third of all 4 of those tanks. But when I've allowed my tanks to get depleted and go below that line and head into the danger zone, into the yellow zone, I've noticed that these descriptions fit me well. I get exhausted. My emotions are totally dysregulated internally. My emotional responses are often out of place or all over the place. I feel more irritable and less gracious. I feel overwhelmed more easily when I'm in the danger zone. And in short, it's not a very nice place to be. I can also speak from experience that life in the red zone is terrible. And this series is mostly focused on the top 2 zones, how to recognize when I go from the healthy to the danger zone. But if you, like me, have lived periods of your life in the red zone, the journey there is not overnight. It's usually a slow bleed out of the taps at the bottom of each tank. More is going out than is going in over a long period of time. And when you wake up and you realize, man, I'm in that burnout zone in the bottom third of each tank, it's not just a good night's sleep or a 2-week holiday that's going to fix that. There's usually a rebuilding process of figuring out my input and my output. Often people in the red zone benefit from external help from professionals to just hold up a mirror and say, can you see this is how your responses are going? This is where things are at. People in the red zone feel like escaping. The sad and tragic thing is that for many of us, maybe even seated here today, we become so used to life in the yellow zone or the red zone that becomes our address. And we occasionally visit the blue zone. And we love how it feels, but we very soon go back to what we know as normal, life in the yellow zone or the third zone. And Jesus gives us an astonishing promise. He says, I have come that you can have life to the full. To put it into this metaphor, I believe that Jesus is offering us life in the healthy zone across my physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. That if I'm willing to do some of the hard yards of recognizing these things, His promises to help me. My personal confession is this, and I say this with sadness, is that I've been in church-paid ministry for nearly 30 years. And for the first 15 years of being in church-paid ministry, I had all kinds of excuses why this was not possible for me. Permanent address in the healthy zone. I used to say things like, it's just too busy at the moment. This is just a season. I used to say, I'm under more stress than other people. Look at what I do. And what am I meant to do? Somebody has to do the work. All of these I now reflect on are excuses or comments that danger zone addicts make. And I was guilty. At a deep level, I felt that other people who lived in the healthy zone were usually just lazy or unmotivated for life, but hard workers like me, we were never going to live in the healthy zone. Boy, what a lot of rubbish. God has deeply challenged me that this kind of thinking is actually sinful and destructive to me and doesn't bring glory to Him. And I've repeatedly had to get down on my knees and say, God, help me change the way I think and change the way I live, that I can live life to the full in top 4 tanks, at the top of each of those tanks, in the top third, and figuring out what to do that weekly, not just waiting once a year to take a holiday in order to fill the tanks up. Following on from this promise from Jesus, there's an invitation by Him, and the invitation is this, is come to me. It's a beautiful verse in Matthew 11. He says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, and you'll find rest for your souls. This rest for your souls is language of the internal tanks. And the starting point, Jesus says to each one of us, is an invitation, come to me, to the person of Jesus. And this is the starting point for finding true soul health and rest for our souls, or finding true fuel for our tanks. The incredible thing about this offer is that Jesus is offering to teach us. Come to me, all you are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. He says, learn from me. I'm willing to show you and to guide you and to teach you. This is an incredible thing because the one who is making the offer is the creator of this world, the one who came to earth in human form. He knows, I beg your pardon, getting too excited. Yeah, he knows what it's like to live with mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual needs. And He's now the one seated on the throne who will never grow tired or weary, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. The great shepherd of our souls offers to me and to you, come to me. I think there's many different ways that we can do this, but at a practical level, one of the ways that I come to Him is I set aside time each day just to be with Him, reading His Word and spending some time in prayer. The reason for these 36 devotional readings that are here over 6 weeks is to give you an opportunity, if you're not in the habit of doing that, to carve time aside each day. And my recommendation is kind of aim to set aside the same time each day where possible, to build the habit. We do that with important things like meals, with our children's bedtimes, hopefully with our bedtimes. What's more important than coming to Him to spend time with Him? And so when I carve out that section, the chunk of time in a day, and in this series we've got some devotional readings, the aim isn't just to get the info into my head. It's to have a heart connection with the God of the universe, and this is the excuse to do that with, or the reason to do it. And when I do that, I try and find a place that I can sit down where I'm relatively comfortable, silent my phone, turn it upside down. If it's connected to your watch, disconnect that as well for that time, and say, God, here I am. I'm coming to you. I want to learn more about you and more about myself. And it's astonishing the revelation that God's willing to give to eager students and listeners and learners on the journey. And that brings me to my third and final point this morning, is that this needs a response from me. And the response is that I should be willing to change. Jesus said in Matthew 11:29, the verse I just read, He said, learn from me. Learn from me. Learning in this context is not just gaining more information to be able to sprout out. Learning is an experiential journey of transformation. And Jesus invites me and invites you to learn from Him. Come on the journey. I told you earlier that I spent at least 18 months doing this measurement myself. This was just my personal journey. It wasn't any content I'd found. I just kind of was figuring out as I went. And as I started to keep track of these 4 tanks, it was like putting on 3D glasses, because it gave me a lot more questions and answers up front. For example, I thought about my physical energy tank. And how do you measure your physical energy? How did I feel the last 24 hours? Felt pretty good. I was a bit tired by the end of the day. But I started to think about how tired or rested have I been over the last week. How well am I eating? I'm trying to explain these tanks in just a minute. How well have I hydrated over the last 24 hours? Have I been exercising? And there's lots more that goes into that, including the quality of my sleep each night. My emotional energy tank, as I started to try and measure that, it's like, how have I been feeling the last 24 hours? And my vocabulary was pretty limited. My words were pretty much happy, sad, mad, or glad. And I started to dive in deeper into trying to understand like different feelings of frustration and anger and joy, sadness, grief, loss, etc. There's a whole lot more that goes on in the emotional tank than just being happy or sad. And more importantly, why am I feeling like that? What happened in the last 24 hours to leave me with those emotions? When my mental energy tank, as I started to journey on that one, I started to think, what has the quality of my thoughts been like over the last 24 hours? Have they been positive, creative, and uplifting thoughts? Or have they been negative, sluggish, and frustrated thoughts on the whole? And if I'm invited to live life to the full, the quality of my thoughts determines the quality of my life. And I've got the power to grab hold of thought habits and change them. My spiritual energy came down primarily to this question: how close have I been feeling to God the Father? And that's an important question, because God never moves. But my tank's empty and full. And so my spiritual energy was kind of measuring, have I felt connected to God, yielded to do things His way? Part of the reason we've structured this series as we have is that it's got 6 Sunday messages, which is here in rows. It's got these 36 readings, which is done personally. But it's also got the 6 midweek videos, which are done in circles, maybe in lounges or places of influence or work. And the video gives some content, but for me, the real power related to those groups is the discussion that happens afterwards. Because as I share what I've been thinking and feeling, somebody else shares some of their journey, and we journey together. Somebody wise put it like this: if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And so my encouragement to each one of us today is that if you're not yet in a group, why not for this 6-week series, sign up to join a group just for 6 weeks? I'm pretty sure that none of the groups here will require any signature, thumbprint, vial of your blood, or credit card details. Just come and join us on the journey. And as we go through the workbook ourselves personally, as we sit here together corporately on Sundays, as we journey together with groups, our heart attitude should be, Lord, please make changes in my life. Please show me and guide me. As I was journeying along these things and trying to figure it out desperately, there were a few major things that God revealed to me about myself that needed big change. One of them, and I'd like to close with a story before finishing the final verse, is to try and understand myself better. I asked a trusted man, a wise man in our church, as an executive coach, would he mind if I went to him for coaching, leadership coaching person? I didn't know what I was looking for, but I'm willing to change. And he one day in one of our sessions shared with me about a recurring challenge that he had to do with overwork. And he had been one of the directors of Unilever in South Africa and then transitioned into executive coaching in his mid-50s, and shared with me how this had been a constant theme of his life, was overwork and needing to manage it. I think God must have used that conversation, because that night I fell asleep, and the next morning at about, just when you're in that REM sleep, and just before I woke up, I had this profound, I don't know what else to describe it, but an encounter with God, where through my thoughts and in my heart, I just felt God challenge me to the core of my being. In alcoholism, I believe that you get various kinds of expression. You get noisy alcoholism, which is kind of loud and out there, but then you also get quiet, silent expression of alcoholism. And I felt like God said to me, Steve, your drug of choice is work. And you've been so critical of the noisy workaholics, but you're the quiet closet workaholic. And I felt so deeply convicted by God. I was weeping. I woke up sobbing as this challenge from God happened in my soul. I'm sitting there every day measuring my little tanks. How can I do better? And I feel like God deeply convicted me that the reason my tanks are so consistently in the danger zone is that I have an unhealthy relationship with my work. And I'm a pastor. And I felt God say to me, there's some aspects of my job that I'm not doing because He's asked me to do it. I'm doing it because it makes me feel good. And there's an idolatry in my heart. There was an idolatry in my heart that my work had taken a place of worth that only God should fill. I sobbed. Jackie woke up next to me. She says, what's wrong? So I'm a workaholic and I don't know what to do. It took her a while to figure out where all of this was coming from. And then I said, and my biggest challenge is today at 8 o'clock, I've got to go to the office. What do you do? And this put me on an amazing journey of down on my knees, saying, God, I feel helpless in the face of what you've revealed to me. Please help me to change the idolatry of my heart. I don't want to be the workaholic that I've always been critical of others, and I see I'm guilty of myself. I want to be a God-glorifying, living in the top third of each tank. By God's grace, I've made some changes in my heart attitude towards my work. It's an ongoing journey and an ongoing challenge. And I share that story to make this point, is that this model up front is real simple. And it's designed like that on purpose. It's not too difficult to think about the 4 tanks and try and fill in the answers. But some of those answers have got this 3D impact that lead us to fixing some of the stuff that's broken in our lives, maybe been broken for decades. God, why is my emotional tank always empty? Well, there's some stuff in your life I want to fix, He might say to me and to you. And so the journey of grace is this promise from God, life to the full, the invitation, come to me. And then the desire of my heart saying, God, I'm willing to learn and I'm willing to change. In closing, I'd like to put this verse back on the screen, Matthew 11, verse 28, the verse I read earlier. And in a moment, I'm going to invite us all to stand, and then I'm going to make this verse into a prayer. And this is a prayer of my heart, and hopefully it's a prayer of yours as well. I'm willing to pray the prayer off the mic, but my invitation as you stand is that you pray it from your heart and say, God, I want this to be true of me for the next 6 weeks and for the rest of my life. So why don't we stand together?